Hi, I'm Derek Ashong, and you are now on the stream. Today, how online gaming is helping scientists make breakthroughs in medical research, and why India's Iron Lady, Irom Sharmila, continues her 11-year hunger strike. And is her government listening? Our digital producer, Ahmed Shihab al-Din, is here looking out for your feedback as always. Joining us on the couch today is Anushe Hossain. She's the author of the blog Anushe's Point and a columnist for the Huffington Post, Forbes, and Miss Magazine. Anushe, wonderful to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Oh, it's a pleasure. What kind of stuff do you typically write about?
I write about women's rights and politics and pretty much current events with a global feminist edge and a global perspective.
Okay, that's cool. Now, how is it feasible, though, to write about feminism from a global perspective? Because it seems that people have such different ideas of gender, positioning, and identity in different parts of the world.
Well, I think that's a really good question. I think it's really easy to write about from a global feminist perspective, actually, because a lot of these issues people think are only local to developing countries, and like the women's rights movement is over in the West, and really, these are issues that I always like to say, as politically incorrect as this may be, issues that poor developing countries may have, poor brown women's issues. But what I like to see, and what my perspective always is this: it's a global movement because women's rights is something that we're all struggling for. It just depends on, it might be different in America, and might be different in Bangladesh, but we're still trying to fight for the same rights in our own ways.
Well, we've got a really powerful story today about a woman who's fighting for the rights of all people, and I think it would be great to get some of your insights on that.
I'm excited
Wonderful to
about
have
that.
you with us today.
Great, thank you
Absolutely.
so much.
Remember, you can always tell us the stories that matter to you. Follow us on Twitter, send us a tweet using the hashtag AJStream. We may be able to feature your story in a future episode.
Hi, my name is Mariam Al Khawaja. I'm a human rights activist from Bahrain, and I'm in the stream.
Solving a protein puzzle that had stumped scientists for years, online gamers have in a matter of weeks opened the door for improved drugs used for AIDS treatment. Take a look at this video. It should give you a little bit of insight into what we're talking about on this particular segment. Now, the program gamers are playing is called Folded. It's a three-dimensional puzzle game where players earn points by creating accurate protein models. Within a 3-week span, gamers generated models that enabled researchers to find the protein they were looking for, one that would actually be receptive to a drug blocking the growth of the HIV virus. The gamers weren't biochemists, and they didn't need to have any special background in science. They were everyday users. So, how did these gamers beat the scientists? And what does this mean for future scientific advances? Joining me now from Seattle to discuss this is Seth Cooper, co-creator of Folded. Seth, welcome to the stream.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, before we get even into the harnessing of the power of the gamers, what exactly moved you to create this particular platform?
Well, it sort of is related to another project that was here at the University of Washington, which is called Rosetta at Home. And this is a volunteer computing distributed screensaver project where the people who run the project actually can donate their spare computing time to try to fold up proteins. But we were sort of thinking about the problem and the fact that, just adding more computation to try to solve the problem might not be the best way to go forward with trying to solve this. So we wanted to actually get human spatial reasoning and problem-solving ability involved.
Now, before you go further there, there's a really interesting point here. Tell us why you didn't think more computational power would be enough. Why did you need to get a human input?
Right, because for proteins, even for very small proteins, they just have a huge number of shapes that they can possibly take, and so it's basically impossible for even a network of computers, a supercomputer, to actually search through all of them, which is basically what computers are trying to do now.
Okay, so once you came up with this platform and you realized that, hey, we want to get people involved, how did you go about creating a game that would actually engage them?
Well, we tried to sort of simplify and make this rather difficult scientific problem more approachable by coming up with fun visualizations that are kind of like what you'd see in a game, and trying to get right to the point where you're able to directly interact with the protein in the system and see what it does. There's also a whole series of introductory levels that are starting from very, very simple proteins and simple problems designed to take a player from not knowing anything about biochemistry to actually being able to know how the game works and how to compete in the online puzzles that we post.
And like, I want to get some of our audience involved in this conversation, but quickly, what motivates somebody to play this game?
From sort of talking to some of our players, I think a lot of them are motivated by altruism and the sort of desire to do something helpful and contribute something to science. And through Foldit, they're able to do this while playing a game that something good might actually come out of their gameplay.
Seth, we asked our audience, our community, when they think this would have a real impact on the pharmaceutical industry. And we have Miriam, who on Twitter said, "I'd say a maximum of 5 years at the rate medicine and technology has jumped this past decade. This seems to be the missing puzzle piece." So she's complimentary there, but I'm curious, what is there a downside to crowdsourcing medical information? I mean, what would you say to that?
Well, I think that Foldit and games like this, in a sense, are a tool and a framework that we can use to try to solve problems. And from our perspective, we're trying to solve problems that will be helpful for society and beneficial. And we want to sort of make all the results and things that come out of the game public and available to everyone. So, for instance, the structure of the solution that was solved by these players has actually now been deposited in the PDB, which is the sort of publicly available global data bank of all the protein structures. So anyone can actually go now and see it.
So what do you think about this, Anusha? I mean, is this the beginning of a different way of maybe looking at science, where you don't just look at the perspective of the experts, but we actually try to tap into the wisdom of the crowd?
Exactly, and open up the discussion. I think it's really interesting. When I first started reading about this, I was wondering, what is the controversy and if there's some kind of issue about intellectual property going on here. But I think it actually, goes to show that sometimes maybe the experts aren't the experts. And the more we open up the issue, whoever can help us solve the puzzle, it's better, especially for an issue like HIV/AIDS.
Now, Seth, I want to dive a little further into the computational component, because we understood as we were researching this that there are just certain ways that human beings think spatially that it's very difficult for computers to replicate. We hear so much about how technology is advancing. It's so great. Technology will make certain kinds of jobs and certain kinds of people apparently obsolete. What is it about the human mind that enables it to do this better than a computer?
It's architected kind of in a different way, and there are particular problems that people have been, evolving for a long time to actually be able to solve with their minds in a different way that computers kind of look at things. So there are a lot of kinds of problems like this. For instance, there are things like CAPTCHAs where, people are a lot better at looking at text and recognizing text than computers currently are. And reCAPTCHA, right, the project that's actually digitizing books using human visual skills. And in the case of Foldit here, we're trying to use spatial reasoning skills that players have, problem solving, the ability to think about the pieces of the protein and how they fit together and actually persist with the kinds of moves and restructurings at a higher level that they think will be beneficial, where a computer might actually get stuck in the low-level kinds of number crunching of things. And also, people are very creative and good at coming up with new ideas for how the pieces of the protein might actually fit together.
Can this be applied? Can this philosophy, this methodology be applied to maybe solving other medical questions?
Yeah, and I think that there are a lot of different kinds of problems that people are still, ahead of where computation is at. And in fact, we're looking at new kinds of problems here with Foldit and actually letting players not just predict the structures of proteins that already exist in nature, but actually design entirely new proteins. So actually being able to be really creative and come up with new kinds of things that might help fight disease. And even beyond that, we're looking at kinds of new games that can help allow players to design like nano devices and other kinds of forward-facing technological achievements.
This is really fascinating stuff, Seth, the gamification of scientific research. Thanks so much for taking the time to explain it to us.
Thank you.
Cheers. And remember, you can learn more about this particular story right on our website at stream.aljazeera.com. You're also going to find videos and various other information from previous shows right there.
Now here at the stream, we received several videos of the latest demonstrations in Saudi Arabia over the past couple days. In Al Qatif, a large city, it's a city on the coast of Saudi's eastern province, clashes between police and protesters have left many injured. Now the protests began after Saudi security forces arrested two elderly men on Sunday in order to pressure their activist sons to surrender to police. But according to sources on the ground, one of the arrested men had a heart attack upon arrival at the police station. Now, this video right here is one of many videos. It was sent to the stream and shows reportedly an ambulance with the man who had the heart attack inside. Now, when protesters heard the news, they surrounded the station and started to throw rocks and other objects into the compound. Now, human rights activists who tried to speak to the police and enter the compound were also arrested. And on Monday, crowds armed with guns and Molotov cocktails reportedly stormed the station again, leaving 11 policemen and 3 others injured. Now, we have some video from there. These videos have already received tens of thousands of hits. This is the video from Monday, where you can see some of the clashes right there and the fires. Now, since February, Saudi Arabia has seen sporadic protests from Shias who are largely discriminated against by the Wahhabi majority in Saudi Arabia. And on Wednesday, the Interior Ministry warned they would use, quote, an iron fist against those who compromise the kingdom's security. And on Facebook, of course, that's part of the story. This Facebook page right here, it's called the Eastern Province in English. In Arabic at the top, I'll just scroll up, it says Thawrat al-Mantaqa al-Sharqiyya, which is the Eastern Province. It has over 14,000 likes and has seen a lot of activity in recent days. Now, in response, Saudi Arabia has said that an unknown foreign country was responsible for the unrest, which in the Gulf is often a coded reference to Iran. And now, for a tech story out of Africa, October 6th is the start of Maker Faire Africa. So if you don't know what that is, Maker Faire is a yearly event that brings together innovators and inventors. And this year it's being held in Cairo. And if you're going to be there, or if you have other tech stories from Africa, we really want to hear from you for a future segment that we're planning here on the stream. So tweet us your videos, photos of all of the best innovations from Africa that you've heard of. Just use the hashtag AJStream as always.
Hi, my name is Adriano. I come from Palo Alto, California, but I'm Italian. I'm the CEO of Tactile Eyes, which is the first publishing platform for the iPad, and I'm on the stream.
For almost 11 years now, Irom Sharmila, who's also known as India's Iron Lady, has fasted for the repeal of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, a law which shields soldiers from being prosecuted for extrajudicial killings in certain regions of India. But is the Indian government listening to Sharmila's protest? The inability to seek justice for civilian deaths has angered many in India's northeastern regions. For more than 5 decades now, insurgent groups there have been fighting against the Indian military. Take a look at this map. It shows the 7 states, or 7 sisters, of India's northeast, which is not only geographically distinct from the rest of the country, but also ethnically and subculturally different. If you look at this image here, this is an example of 2 young children from that region. Many there have accused the Indian government of neglect and indifference on issues of poverty, discrimination, and underdevelopment in the region. Joining us now via Skype to tell us more about this story is Shabir Ghosh. He's an author and blogger who focuses on India's Northeast and has been following Sharmila's campaign. Shabir, welcome to the stream.
Thank you very much.
Now, first of all, we'd like to know, Sharmila has actually been in this hunger strike for 11 plus years. Has it had any impact on the government?
I really don't think so. She started her fast in the year 2000, and that was probably in the month of November. And in 2004, the Indian government had constituted a committee, a 5-member committee, to look into the validity of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. That committee submitted its report sometime in the middle of 2005. But it has been like 6.5 years, more than 6 years, since the government was given that report, and where the five-member committee had very clearly called for the repealing of the act. But the Indian government hasn't acted so far.
So now this is fascinating in part because of some recent developments, which I'm going to bring up momentarily. But we know that Sharmila has been able to survive effectively through force feeding, through a feeding tube. She's been in prison a number of times on charges of attempted suicide. And for 11 years, she's largely been fed through this feeding tube. And yet we saw Anna Hazare, who protested for 12 to 13 days earlier this year. He was on hunger strike for about 2 weeks. And you saw this massive response from the populace, from the government. You actually saw the government making certain changes. We're looking at an 11-year campaign by this woman. What is the difference between her cause and why has Anna Hazare gotten so much traction?
I would personally definitely have an opinion about the Hazare agitation, the way it was manipulated, the way it was orchestrated. But that's a different issue altogether. What one really needs to understand is that corruption is something that affects everyone. It affects every strata of society. It affects people in every state, every city. Whereas the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is kind of restricted to only two very small states in the Northeast right at the moment and in Jammu and Kashmir. So there you have the difference. So it's quite natural that if Anna Hazare or anyone for that matter raises a voice against corruption, it's quite natural that people everywhere will sympathize with him. Whereas the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is something totally different. The people who have been voicing their opinion, their feelings against the Armed Forces Act have very necessarily been people who have been at the receiving end of that act.
Subir, you spoke a little bit about why you think perhaps she's not getting as much attention, but on Twitter people are giving their own opinions and some match what you're saying. Layla Zinat says, it's because the AFSPA, so the Armed Forces Act, doesn't affect the people of this country. It becomes irrelevant. Most don't even know who she is. But then Priya Raju says, amending it may be an option, but the media doesn't care enough about the Northeast in general. And a lot of people are echoing that fact, as if the Northeast doesn't matter. Can you explain a little bit to us why that might be the case?
It's a huge canvas there when you talk about the neglect of the Northeast. That, of course, would be there. The Northeast had never been very politically significant as far as India is concerned. It's a region where 7 states cumulatively send only 24 MPs to Parliament. So in a Parliament, in the lower house of Parliament, the Lok Sabha, where there are 544 members, 24 MPs from an entire region are not that politically significant. That is one of the reasons. And the second reason being that the mainstream media basically caters to the major cities here in India, and there people are not really interested about reading or knowing so much about the Northeast. It's very easy to blame the media for everything, but the thing is that if people here in Delhi or Bombay or Madras or Calcutta don't take an interest in the Northeast, why should you be blaming the media for it?
I think another really big problem with gaining more momentum and attention on this woman's plight is the fact that the subcontinent has a really complicated and really, what I consider we should be ashamed of history of neglecting and being dismissive of our minority groups. And what this woman has going for her is not only is she an ethnic minority of India, she's also a woman. I mean, I know that corruption affects everybody's everyday life, but so does her cause. I don't think we can be dismissive about it. I think it has more to do with the fact that she's from a minority group. And we see this issue in Bangladesh as well, which is where I'm from, and we're completely dismissive. Nobody wants to hear about what our tribal people's concerns are, what they're fighting for, what they need. It's it's not only the media's issue, it's largely a population issue as well.
I'm so glad you brought that up because we did a story about the Jumma people of the Chittagong Hills tracts, which is a minority. And as with the people in the Seven Sisters region, they're ethnically distinct from the primarily Bengali populace of Bangladesh. And likewise, these people are another religion, culture, a phenotype. They look different. And I would bring this back to you. Why is it that India feels they even have an interest in this region? What do they get? What strategic value do they have in holding on to this area if the populace doesn't seem to care about it?
Was that meant for me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and yeah, I would first react to the thing about Sharmila being a woman. I really don't think it wouldn't have made any difference to India if Sharmila had been a man. The people are not really interested in the Northeast. That's for one. The second is now looking at the Armed Forces Act itself. See, if you have an opinion about it, it necessarily has to be a political opinion. Whereas in the case of Hazare and corruption, no, you would have seen that those who supported Hazare essentially cut across political party lines. So there was not really an ideological difference there. But in case of the Armed Forces Act, it's very much a political issue because what you're trying to tackle is insurgency, and insurgency in itself is a political issue. You cannot really have an opinion also about the Armed Forces Act without talking about solving the political problem out there.
But Shabir, I'm sorry. What is the political problem? We're looking at a region that is geographically separate from the rest of the subcontinent. What is India's investment in that region?
In what sense? Could you just...
oh, yeah, certainly. So what I'm getting at is it seems that these are people who seem to be somewhat distinct from the populace, and obviously India is a very diverse country, but these are people who tend to be phenotypically and religiously, culturally more closer to the cultures of, say, Myanmar and some of the neighboring regions. So why is it that India is holding on to that territory? What is the strategic or economic value there?
The economic value, one of the reasons why the Northeast has been neglected probably is because you always extracted something from the Northeast and never wanted to give anything back in return. And in that sense, the maximum that India extracted from the Northeast was oil from Assam. So that was probably the only economic benefit that India, as a country, basically got from the Northeast. And you talked about the people being ethnically different. Of course, the Northeast itself is extremely diverse as far as ethnicities are concerned.
Subir, if I can just throw this question to you, or this comment from Twitter. Samita, I am Samita on Twitter, says, again, driving this point home that many people in India don't even know that there is an Armed Forces Act. At the end of the day, wouldn't you say that's maybe the problem?
Definitely yes. But like I said, despite my opinion against the Hazare-led corruption movement, what actually happened was that Sharmila, for good reasons or bad, got drawn into the controversy. The only thing that was similar between Hazare and Sharmila were that they were carrying on fasts. But at least, the last 2-3 months, I have been seeing a lot more people talking about the Armed Forces Act than I saw, say, 20 years ago. That is definitely a positive development.
I think this woman's dedication to the cause itself, even if she was protesting tree planting, the fact that she has been fasting for 11 years should itself bring a lot of attention to the issue.
Absolutely, and we're going to stay on that issue. And actually, when we come back, we're going to ask you, Shabir, to stay with us because we want to talk to you a little bit about some of the reasons why this Special Powers Act might be enforced. Thank you, Shabir and Anushay, for being with us. Stay with us online at stream.aljazeera.com, where this conversation is going to continue. Remember, on Thursday, we're looking at war in Afghanistan, 10 years on, and through the eyes of Afghan youth. As always, tweet us your suggestions and your feedback at AJStream. For now, we'll continue the conversation on India. We'll see you online. Hi, welcome to the Post Show. We're speaking about some ongoing events in the northeastern region of India and the 11-year hunger strike of Irom Sharmila, known as India's Iron Lady. Sabir, I'd like to come back to you with this question. Let's look at the other side of the coin here. You know, there has been an ongoing insurgency in many of those 7 states that we refer to as the Seven Sisters. There's been violence. You've seen people, both citizens and members of the military, killed. Is there not a reason that the government believes that they need to have something like the Armed Forces Special Powers Act?
Not at all. Not at all. In fact, I must point out 2 things. The first is that the Supreme Court ruling on the Armed Forces Act, what it had ruled, is that the act is in fact constitutional. So what Supreme Court essentially did was only say that the particular act was okay as far as the ambit of the Constitution was concerned. What they never said was this act can be misused. So that is a judgment basically that is being used by the advocates of the Armed Forces Act to justify its existence. That's number one. The second is, after the Manmohan Singh led government in UPA 1 formed this committee to look into the validity of the Armed Forces Act, validity as in the sense of whether it's actually a very humane act. And they submitted their report after, say, 6 months of touring the Northeast extensively, and they very clearly called for the repealing of the act. What they said was you don't need it in the first place because there are existing laws which can be modified just a little bit and give the armed forces the bare minimum immunity that they require to carry out and counter-insurgency operations. So you don't need the act in the first place.
Now, let me ask you one other question just to follow up on that, because so you mentioned the issue of the counterinsurgency, but we've heard that there are a number of other issues that speak to at least what is allegedly a neglect by the Indian government. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what else is happening on the ground there with regard to poverty, access to opportunity for the people of the Northeast?
So the Northeast had always been politically deprived. It had always been economically deprived. So while you had some resources being extracted from the Northeast, the country as such never gave back anything to the Northeast in return. So the kind of poverty, I really wouldn't harp on poverty because the kind of poverty that you might see in the Northeast would almost be slightly better off, in fact, from the poverty that you would see in the heartland of India, where Maoism has been thriving. So the poverty is actually not the issue there. The issue is whether at least the states are empowered in some way or the other. I don't think they are. And I have been seeing that for more than 20 years now.
Subir, Anushe was saying earlier that this woman shows her dedication, for 10 years protesting. That shows dedication. But just to play devil's advocate, we have Ibrahim Daji on Twitter saying 10 years is a long time. If in that time there's nothing changing, it won't be working. So perhaps she shouldn't. But we understand that in less than 2 decades, almost 6,000 people have died because of extrajudicial killings. In your opinion, is this an issue that Indians should care about across the entire country?
I could probably break down your question into a number of questions, in fact.
I often do this, forgive me. Just answer the last part.
In what sense? In what sense?
Do you think that because there have been 6,000 people in less than 2 decades who've died because of extrajudicial killings, do you think the rest of the Indian, people should care about this issue, the Armed Forces Act?
Of course they should. I mean, I personally don't hail from the Northeast, but I have even frittered away 20 years of my life writing about the Northeast. I mean, why shouldn't you care about the Northeast? If you really don't care about the Northeast, I mean, why should you want the Northeast to be part of India? I mean, that's really outrageous. I mean, if you think that the Northeast is part of India, if you really think that this woman has been fasting for something for the last 10 years, you should really stand up for it. And you should really stand up for speak out for her.
You know, we have something similar in Bangladesh as well. I think it extends beyond the Northeast. I think whenever you give an extra judiciary body unlimited power like this, it's frightening, you know? I mean, we have a similar force in Bangladesh called RAB. It's the Rapid Action Battalion Force, and they basically have the right to go ahead and kill people, you know, with impunity. And just in the past 5 years, they have killed thousands of Bangladeshis. You know, they completely abuse their power. They're not held accountable by the government or by our courts, and they basically act at will, and they even carry out their own personal interests. They recently beat up and murdered, you know, a 15-year-old boy just last month. So I think whenever there's a body that doesn't have to answer to anybody, it goes beyond just you know, the concerns of the people of the Northeast. It really concerns everybody in the country.
But Anusha, what is the solution in this case? Because you're talking, as you mentioned, they've got 24 members of parliament. It's a geographically and politically excluded part of the country to some degree. As we've been hearing today, most of the population is not even necessarily thinking about this issue. So what recourse do they have?
Well, somebody has to take responsibility for them. We can't just be like, well, you're different and you're far away and it doesn't really relate to us. They're still a part of India. And guess what? There's thousands of different kinds of cultures, religions, and people of India. So we can't be dismissive of these people. If they are represented by the Indian government, even if the mass majority of the people aren't interested in it, they're still a part of India. So it still falls under the Indian government's responsibility.
Shabir, I want to thank you so much for being with us today, enlightening us on this topic, and Anusha, very much for your thoughts on this as well. Thank you, Shabir.
Thank you very much for having me there.
Absolutely. So we're coming to the close of the show. Ahmed, I know you've got a couple of stories that we've been following. Tell us a little bit about what you've been looking at.
Yeah, so every morning, you know, we look at stories and we try to decide which ones we're going to cover on that day. But speaking of India, India has what's being called its first Islamic phone. So it's a phone that caters to Muslims, and apparently it's going to be in stores in November. And it already comes fully equipped, as you can see on my monitor. It's $60, comes preloaded with apps like an Islamic calendar, halal meat guide, and a Qibla direction finder. So perhaps that'll be my gift to both of you.
Couldn't you, oh, that would be lovely, I'd appreciate it. But couldn't you just get those apps on any phone? I mean,
Yeah, I was saying even India has the iPhone. So what's special about this phone?
I mean, you know, perhaps this is somewhat of a marketing ploy, but you know, everyone uses marketing, and I think perhaps it's because it comes preloaded, and there's people you have to always
trust. So you don't have to shop around on the iPhone App Store.
But you have to trust that there's people who actually probably prefer not to, you know, shop and go looking for things. They just want something that comes fully equipped.
Maybe this is something you can give like your grandfather or your grandmother. Like, here you go. You don't even have to go to the App Store.
Yeah, different demographics.
Your Muslim
Absolutely,
grandmother.
convenience. There you go.
And then the second story we were looking at is that the Thai Prime Minister has now suspended her Twitter account.
Oh, this is great.
Yeah, so this is Thai Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra. Apparently a couple people were hacking into her account. I'm just going to read you one of the tweets that was sent from her account once it was hacked. It says, "Do the poor have a chance? ? We are exploiting the poor, hoping for their votes to support us to plunder the country." So an informed, perhaps, and brave hacker right there. And so now she no longer uses Twitter, even though we saw that during the elections.
She had a
everyone
strong following in Facebook, the whole nine.
And that was a, you know,
she
big
was like
story.
the social media candidate. I mean, the opposition was too, but she had done very well with it.
I guess her actions speak louder than her words because it's no comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
She's like, end of conversation.
She's like, now that I've been elected, I don't need to use these tools. All right, and then we have in Zambia, this man who his name is Guy Scott. He's a politician, and you probably might notice that he is white and not black, but he's apparently going to be the new vice president of Zambia. He was appointed by the newly elected Zambian president, Michael Sata. And of course, perhaps as you can imagine, this created quite the controversy online. People are questioning whether, you know, there should be a white vice president. I don't know, what do you make of that? Do you think?
I think, you know, I don't want to give a yes or no answer, but I completely understand. We saw something like this in Zimbabwe as well with all the past white farmers. I think the colonial history there is so fresh and so new. You understand why people are going to be emotional about it, but
Yeah, that
At the
makes
same
sense.
time, it's really difficult to be like, no, you can't, because it's like, it's reverse racism, right?
Well, yeah, and I'm curious, like, what are, you know, I've heard that some people on Twitter have
Yeah.
been complaining about it. What are Zambians saying about it? Because otherwise, the argument then is that, okay, well, we know you're a part of our population, but you're excluded for
Yeah,
reasons
which is what
X,
the
Y,
whites
Z.
did for so long,
Exactly.
right?
You mean so as long as Zambians are okay with it, no one else should?
I mean, I don't want to go out
Well,
on
at
a
the
limb
end of
because
the
I don't
day,
know
No,
but
a
it
lot
makes
about
sense.
what's on the ground, but it's kind of like, you know, if you're a population that is multiracial, how do you say that this racial group can't participate in government?
Well, a quick search on Twitter, I just put his name into Twitter. We see one tweet right here that's linking to an article in The Guardian. It says, though Zambia's white vice president hails, quote, a new cosmopolitan era. So a new
Yeah.
era, perhaps indicating the fact that he was elected, might indicate or suggest there's a new era in Africa.
Well, you never
African
know. I mean, the
politics.
Yeah, so
former
whites
president
and
of
blacks
Ghana was
working
half
together.
white.
Right.
Former president of Ghana was half white. Current president
Yeah.
of the United States is half white. So, you know.
It's true. Maybe
Absolutely.
there'll be
It's
a
true.
biracial
Maybe
Obama
the,
is
the
starting a
half white
global
thing is
trend.
coming into play. We'll see more of that
It's a
propagating around the
global trend.
world.
It's the Obama effect.
The Obama effect,
Obama
indeed.
effect.
Listen, that was a great show. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you so much for
Anushay.
having me, guys.
Oh,
Very
forgive me.
insightful.
I just wanted to point out, I
Yeah.
forgot to do this. If you are at home interested in these stories or you want to participate with the stream, as always, we have right here our Reddit subreddit. You go to reddit.com/r/Al Jazeera, AJ stream rather, as always, and you see there are the top stories that we just discussed: Zambia, Thailand, and India. So you can vote them up, vote them down, and
Absolutely.
We'll
Let
leave
us
you with that.
know what you think about the Zambian president and about Thailand's prime minister jumping off of Twitter.
Yeah.
Thanks for being with us today. As always, tweet us using the hashtag AJStream. We'll be back again. We'll see you tomorrow, and we'll see you online.